being. I'm delighted to welcome to the studio today, Professor William Hynes. Hiya, Billy.
Hi, Alec. Very nice to be in touch again, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
No, delighted. My goodness, the power of Zoom and being able to catch up with people, it's fantastic. And your world has changed quite a lot in recent times, but we'll get on to that. As you know, I'm going to take you back to your last year in school, and I think our audience would be interested to know, were you the academic? Were you the person who wanted to travel, or what else was going through your mind around that time?
Yeah, I think looking back then, I always had an interest in further study, further education. Didn't know what path it would take, but definitely had a keen interest in what I would consider being the built environment,
Right.
and how places develop, how they're formed, and how one engages with that. So very much on the physical side of that, having grown up in a small town in Tipperary, so always had that kind of urban kind of background, but very much interested in that space. Didn't know exactly what direction it was going to take, but yeah, that was my idea, was to kind of continue learning about that.
Right. So you had a calling of some sort that you followed.
Yeah. So in that sense, the route that I initially went down was in the construction economics space, which is effectively the kind of the qualification you come out with is a quantity surveyor.
All right.
But very much working in that built and building environment.
Right. And just for audience, would you kind of put into layman's terms what a quantity surveyor does?
Yeah, so a quantity surveyor can go on two sides of a fence, if you want to call it that. So you'd have the client's quantity surveyor, and then you'd have the contractor's quantity surveyor. And basically what a QS does on the client side would be to ensure that the designed building or proposed building comes in on time and on budget against a specific specification. And on the contractors side, you want to ensure that again you're delivering, the contractor's delivering the project, the building to that spec within that cost, and ensuring that there's no overruns, and if there are, that they're dealt with in kind of proper procedures or mechanisms. So that's effectively it. So it's all about time, cost, and budget of the project.
What are the specific challenges, would you say, around that? Because I think people would be interested in engaging somebody with that sort of knowledge.
Yeah, I think one of the key skills is not only being of having a quantitative, say, understanding of figures. I think the ability to negotiate and work with many different experts from a multidisciplinary team is very important, and to be able to hear and understand and listen and discuss different people's views and try and tease out and come to best solutions. So I definitely think the power of negotiation and consultation is critical in that space.
It must be interesting, your sort of interactions with architects, particularly those that have sort of grandiose plans.
Yeah, and like, I suppose with architects, like those, if you want to call them grandiose plans, are so important, because you need that innovation, that kind of blue vision thinking to come up with really good, new designs, new innovation, new ways of looking at the built form. But again, against that, you're trying to manage those designs within a specific client budget. You know what I mean? So it's trying to keep it within those parameters, but also trying to not say hamper anyone's flair. You know what I mean? So it's again, it's kind of comes back to that negotiation. You know what I mean? That everybody is achieving the best that they can. You know what I mean? Within the boundaries.
It's quite interesting in terms of sort of architects. There's some very, very creative architects out there who must kind of run roughshod over a lot of the budgets that are there.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do think the bringing and that multidisciplinary approach to it, and making sure everybody has a voice at the table, that everyone can understand, where their expertise is, but how they have to marry that expertise with other restrictions, other conditions, other kind of boundary elements that you have to be aware of.
You were always very interested in how people interact with buildings and how buildings interact with society. Tell me more about that, because people would be fascinated about it.
Yeah, so I worked as a QS on the client side for three years or so, but I always had that fascination of not only the building itself, but also how buildings interact with each other, different uses of buildings, how people interact with those buildings, how they use those buildings, and also how the urban form around those links those buildings, moves people between buildings, between places, between neighborhoods, etc. So I went back then to college and I did a full-time master's in UCD in urban and regional planning. And I really found that fascinating. Again, I always had that slant towards the quantitative analysis, the kind of the number side, the evidence base of how and why things can work. But I really got I grow towards the people, the community, the end user, and trying to make a place a better place for either people to live, to work, to engage with, to recreate with. So having that qualitative mix and understanding with the quantitative kind of evidence base, I always found that really important, and to be able to match the two, and also to be able to explain to the community, to the person, to the to the end user, the understanding and why, but also getting their inputs into it, and what they would like to see about their area, their community, their neighborhood, and how it can be made a better place to live, work, and interact with. So that I found that really fascinating, and that I thought urban and regional planning, that sector really interesting and fascinating to me.
It must be quite interesting because, as you said, one of the real skills is around negotiations. And I suppose big business has always got its own vested interests. And then you've got the community on the other side. And where they meet, needs to be a compromise for everybody.
Yeah. So and even in a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last 10, 15 years is, while you're there to deliver a specific project or plan or strategy, it's the end user, it's the community, it's society that have to really buy into this to ensure that this will be a success.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great to see that community and that citizen voice has got really strong in more recent years. You know what I mean? So it's just not an afterthought, but it's embedded from the start, that their voice, their knowledge, because they have the knowledge of the area. They've either lived there or worked there or a lot of their life or all of their life, and having that deep understanding and their commitment and engagement is so important. And that can really, at the end of the day, bring a much better result to the overall plan or project or strategy. So yeah, citizen engagement, community participation, so important.
I must say there must be a strong focus on good communications, because we start off with two people possibly with different agendas, and having to find the middle ground to keep everybody happy must be quite an interesting challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also have to, in that communication space, you have to be able to obviously listen and be a good listener, be a good communicator, but also it's very important that you talk the language of that community, of that citizen, of that stakeholder group. Mm-hmm. So you're communicating and you're getting your message across to them in a language that's understandable to all. You know what I mean? Because people have different levels of expertise, understanding, knowledge, and you have to bring it to a kind of a common place where everybody can say, yes, I understand that. I see what this can do. I do have reservations. I do have concerns, but I also feel very positive about it. And then you're bringing that forward then in a much better outcome for all. You know what I mean? So yeah, communication, listening, dialogue, talking is really important.
If you're just joining us now, my guest today is Professor William Hynes. He's the Managing Director of Future Analytics, KPMG. A fascinating discussion, which I think most people will be interested about the whole built environment. Just to pick up on the conversation there, Billy, you were then to move into the world of transport, and you took a real interest in that one. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so as I said, I always had that interest in the quantitative side of the planning. And I got the opportunity to move into the transportation planning sector, and I worked as an airport planner with Aerinta, which is now the DAA, for 5 years on the 3 state airports in Ireland, Dublin, Cork, Shannon. And I really found that fascinating, because international airports are effectively like large towns or small cities, and they have a life of their own. They're obviously dealing with the movement of people and goods through the air, but all around that there's direct and indirect or ancillary activities happening. You know, everything from hospitality to retail, and all that goes with it. And I just found it fascinating trying to marry and provide for all that activity. You know what I mean? Both the aviation side and the non-aviation side activity. It was really fascinating. And with that, I also got the opportunity to travel to other international airports and work on other international airports in how they, you know, how they plan, how they develop, how they grow within a very changing space of aviation. As technology movements and advancements were being made, your airport infrastructure had to match that. You know what I mean? Again, to provide efficient and safe movement of people, you know. So that was really interesting.
And I suppose one of the big challenges around that is, while maybe, as you said, large towns or small cities have the ability to sprawl out, the footprint of most airports is fairly constricted.
Yeah, and so in my work with DAA, the master planning process was so important, and also working with, again, goes back to the stakeholder engagement, working with the key stakeholders, be it the local authority, the regional authority, the community, the business community, and understanding their needs, but also to allow the airport to grow and develop safe and efficiently in its own right, because aviation does create a lot of economic benefits, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Both directly and indirectly. And it can be a significant changer of the kind of the socioeconomic profile of an area. But that has to be managed within the locality, the region that is based. So again, a lot of kind of strategic planning required there, master planning, fitting in with the existing plans of a city or county or region. Again, come back to the negotiation elements.
I think one aspect that fascinates me is the whole idea that we're not talking about planning for 5 years' time. Well, it could be 25 years' time, and how you sort of have to try and predict the future.
Yeah, so the whole kind of space of projection analysis is so important. And not only that, but it's trying to forecast or understand or determine how that demand, be it passenger demand, aircraft demand, is going to change with advancements in technology, travel pattern behavior changing. So you're projecting and analyzing in a kind of a crystal ball type space, but to the best you can. And like aviation infrastructure, like any kind of large scale critical infrastructure, takes a long time to come into actual place, you know, to become operational. And then it has a long time lifespan. So you really have to, you know, plan as best you can, because it's big value activity, you know what I mean, that you're developing. So you have to make sure that it's, you know, it's fit for purpose, it's demand driven, but that it's properly planned, because as you say, it's really long term that you're going to get that return on investment. So again, that critical planning is so important.
How does something like COVID suddenly get involved with this sort of long-term planning, something that comes out of the blue and has such a major impact? Tell me how you sort of had to sort of manage your way around that.
Yeah, so I suppose with and kind of moving it into other areas of transport planning that I do, to me, I've always taken the premise that planning for movement, for be it aviation, be it, you know, land-based movement, whatever, is not necessarily much more about the time, but it's about the demand. And you're going to get peaks and troughs in that demand all the time, you know, and you can have severe peaks and troughs. And we've had a severe trough with COVID,
Sure.
but it's all demand driven, and there will be a return to, you know, to growth. That growth is happening now, and it could get tempered again. We don't know, but there will be a return to growth. So you're planning for the future, and it's not necessarily the date of when that will happen, but it's the demand of when that will return to plan for. You know what I mean? And that's, I think that's a really kind of important aspect to understand when you are making your plans or proposals, be it to the decision makers or to the stakeholders, etc., that you kind of place it within that demand driven space and the evidence around that demand, as opposed to saying we need this in 5 years time, 10 years time. You know what I mean? Because that time can change depending on your demand. And that's again has been a typical example of how you do that within a COVID environment, you know.
Sure. One of the other challenges that sort of has come more and more to the front in recent years is the whole idea of carbon footprints and sustainability. How has that impacted the sort of whole decision making around the plans that you've been creating?
Yeah, so like we do a lot of obviously work within the built urban environment and the kind of the movement of people and that whole transportation space, and there are many emerging models now that one can adopt, be it like at a city or a large town or within a transport sector space, you know, around the different models of, you know, the circular economy, net zero, you know, carbon neutral. And I suppose it's what we found is while everyone within the climate action space now is striving towards a lesser or a reduced impact on the climate, one has to be realistic about when you can achieve those targets. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And it's very important to put out targets there that are not going to completely hamstring you. You know what I mean? Or be a burden, but they have to be realistic. They can be changed. The targets can be changed over time as you do your monitoring and evaluation of your targets and your KPIs, but they have to be there, and there has to be flexibility, but they have to be realistic. And I think that within that, say, urban space, some urban areas, some city councils are maybe are really at the forefront and really good leaders, and others are following. And we can learn from those, adopting those different types of models, as I said. But there is a definite opportunity around that for cities and urban areas, but to realize where they are on that scale, and how they can move obviously in a positive direction on that scale, but not overburdening themselves. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of things you can do, like around kind of simple, smart changes, you know what I mean, that one can make, you know what I mean, as a person, as a society, or as a community, but also the decision makers can make, you know what I mean? But I know that those decision makers can be not only the local or regional or national governments, but they also can be the business communities, you know what I mean? As well. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And obviously with COP26 going on now, you know, there is a lot of opportunity and a lot of takeaways that we can actually put into practice.
If you're just joining me now, my guest today is Professor William Hynes, Managing Director of Future Analytics, KPMG. And wow, we're covering quite a lot here. But I just want to take you back just for a moment, because I mean, your passion for this whole area led you on to getting your PhD. Tell us just a bit more about that, and then where that took you on to.
Yeah, so I actually started my PhD in the late 1990s, all around aviation and airport planning, because I was just fascinated by that whole space of how you're matching different demands and different movement types with each other. And that actually led me to the opportunity to become a full-time lecturer in the area of transportation planning in UCD. And I really enjoyed that, working with the students, trying to impart to them, some of the practical knowledge and understandings that I had gained through industry, and bringing kind of real life situations or scenarios to the lecture theatre, and I really found that really fascinating, and just trying to impart knowledge, and to bring students with you on that journey. It's challenging because you have to go at a certain pace that you're bringing everybody with you.
Sure.
Particularly in a technical space such as quantitative transport planning and analysis, you know what I mean? But really thoroughly enjoyed that, and the opportunities that generated, and the engagement with the students, I just thought was fascinating. You know what I mean? Just and they in a way almost became my teacher. You know what I mean?
Yes, of
Because
course.
they were asking questions that and posing issues to me that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of. You know what I mean? And that's the power of engagement. You're learning from each other, and I really found that a very kind of fascinating and a knowledge sharing space as opposed to a knowledge transfer space. It was really, really interesting.
Yeah, you've had a fascinating journey in the sense that you went into, further education, then from there into the real world, and experienced that from a number of different aspects. Now back into academia, but you were going to come back out of that again.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. So in the late 2000s, 2008, I went back into the real world, if you want to call it that, or the applied world, out into the industry sector, and again, but was focusing then on the urban planning, the transport planning that had obviously links with aviation, but really putting what I'd learned through my education, from my previous experience in the aviation sector, and also from my studies and teaching in UCD, but bringing that all together back into a very applied sense in the real kind of urban environment. And I just found that a really fascinating area, while obviously keeping up my linkages with academia as a visiting guest lecturer. So yeah, we worked in the area of strategic, spatial, urban and regional planning, but with a particular focus again on the people, on the person, and that planning was being very much driven by the person, by the population. You know what I mean? And what the population needs, and different types of population, be it the resident population, be it the working population, be it the educational population, understanding their needs and being able to provide for those over different timeframes, short, medium, long term, and all that projection, forecasting, analysis. I just found that fascinating. Again, I suppose it was moving back into that whole quantitative space,
right.
But trying to match that or marry that with the qualitative space, kind of understanding and providing for that the citizen, the community at the heart of it.
I suppose in the last couple of minutes we've got here, you had an experience of out there running a business yourself, but obviously an opportunity came along and you suddenly married up with KPMG. That must have been quite an interesting experience.
Yeah, so we ran Future Analytics Consulting. We set up in 2010 and ran it for 10 years. And that was an amazing journey. I have to say, an amazing journey. As an SME, you do everything. You do everything in the SME space, which is a great, brilliant grounding,
Sure.
and you learn so much. And then in 2020, we got the opportunity to marry up, as you say, or be acquired by KPMG. So now we sit as Future Analytics as a business unit within KPMG. And I have to say that experience has been fantastic. Just the sheer opportunities that has brought in terms of the type of work, the type of client, the level of engagement, and the networking and people that you meet both internally and externally has been fascinating and really rewarding. And it just has opened up other areas and avenues of opportunity, of innovation, and of growth for us. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. We're in KPMG now about just over a year, and
Sure.
time has absolutely flown by. And it's been a really excellent journey. We're still on that journey, on that pathway, but I definitely feel it's been so rewarding over the last 12 months in particular. It's been excellent.
In the minute that we've got left, what next for Billy Hynes?
Well, I suppose on a work-based area, just I want to really to continue that growth of our business unit, future analysts within KPMG, and what I say, really be a positive disruptor to the whole sector. You know what I mean? And really make really positive change. And I think there's huge opportunity there working with my colleagues within the unit, within the wider KPMG, and also with our clients and that wider community group. On a personal note, I obviously want to stay well, both mentally and physically. So I run every day,
Sure.
and I think it's very good for me. And then I've been extraordinarily lucky to have a very good and excellent supporting family structure around me, you know, to allow that to happen. So yeah, so the future is continue on that pathway with KPMG, but also stay mentally and physically as well as possible.
Well, I must say that's a fantastic positive message from our guest today, Professor William Hynes, Managing Director of Future Analytics, KPMG.